Hello and welcome. I'm Matsuma Kataoka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. UK Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy has said that recognizing a Palestinian state would not create one overnight and it must be part of a wider peace process. According to media reports, he further added that Prime Minister Keir Starmer will decide on the issue later today as UK seeks to keep the prospects of a two-state solution alive. A bipartisan U.S. congressional delegation is visiting China for the first time since 2019. Aiming to ease tensions between the two global powers, the group led by Representative Adam Smith met with Chinese Premier Li Qiang in Beijing for talks on trade, defense, and regional issues. The UN Security Council is set to hold an emergency meeting on September 22nd after 3 Russian aircraft violated Estonian airspace. Estonia's foreign ministry has condemned the incident as a brazen breach of sovereignty. President Donald Trump has announced a new plan to impose a $100,000 fee on H-1B visas, a move that could severely impact the U.S. tech industry. Major companies, including Microsoft and JP Morgan, have warned visa holders to stay in the U.S. or return quickly, according to media reports. A U.S.-China agreement will give ByteDance just one of 7 board seats in TikTok's new U.S. entity, with Americans holding the other 6, while control of the app's algorithm will not be under ByteDance. President Donald Trump, who's facing a deadline set by Congress to shut down the app in U.S. unless sold, is pushing this deal to preserve TikTok's access to its 170 million U.S. users. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has organized a day of military training for civilians amid new threats from U.S. President Donald Trump and a massive American naval deployment of 7 ships, F-35 fighter jets, and a nuclear submarine in the Caribbean. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez has accused Washington of waging an undeclared war. An Afghan defense official has said that a deal to return control of Bagram Air Base to the United States is not possible, after President Donald Trump warned bad things would happen if it does not hand back to the U.S. the airbase. The airbase, which was abandoned during the 2021 U.S. withdrawal, remains at the center of tensions between Kabul and U.S. as Kabul rejects any renewed American presence. U.S. President Donald Trump is publicly urging the Justice Department to charge his political rivals, including Adam Schiff and Letitia James, accusing them of mortgage fraud. Trump has also fired a federal prosecutor who declined to bring charges and replaced him with a White House aide. Britain's Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy has defended the government's decision to recognize a Palestinian state. In an interview, Lammy acknowledged that while the move may not bring immediate change, he stressed that establishing a Palestinian state remains a just cause. Let's listen into what he has said.
And I think a lot of that is wrapped up in hope. Will this feed children? No, it won't. That's down to humanitarian aid. Will this free hostages? That must be down to a ceasefire. But does this mean that you get or hold out for that two-state solution and stand by the Palestinian cause being a just cause? Well, that was the determination that I and the Prime Minister made at the end of July. But let's make a distinction between Hamas and the Palestinian people. And what do we say to the children of a future Palestinian state? Do we say we have to wait for the perfect conditions before we can recognize a Palestinian state? Or do we say, when we see the E1 development, the expansion plans the Israeli government now have in the West Bank, when we see the decision not to move towards a ceasefire, but instead to attack Qatar and set back that ceasefire, Do we say to them, no, you cannot have that Palestinian state that is your dream? And I think that's the assessment, not just the UK, but France, Australia, Canada, Belgium are making at this time.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is expected to formally announce recognition in a statement later today, marking a major shift in UK's foreign policy. Starmer has warned in July that unless Israel agreed to a ceasefire and committed to peace talks, Britain would move forward with recognition. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Dan Perry. He's a world affairs analyst, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, what are the potential diplomatic and political consequences for the UK if they make a decision to recognize a Palestinian state?
I don't think the UK will be harmed as such, but the question is whether they might not inadvertently undermine the very cause that they seek to advance. Because the criticism of this move by Starmer basically says that it will be perceived among Palestinians and in the wider Arab world as validation of Hamas's strategy of attacking Israel, invading the country, massacring over 1,000 people, and sparking a calamitously catastrophic war. It will be seen as something that worked because finally the UK was compelled to recognize Palestine and other countries alongside it. And therefore Hamas will be strengthened. Now, Hamas doesn't actually want a Palestinian state. Hamas wants to destroy Israel and to replace it with a single state on the entirety of the Holy Land territory, Israel plus the West Bank plus Gaza. And as long as Hamas is around, and as long as Hamas is strengthened, and as long as they are militarized, Israel will absolutely take no further risks to enable the establishment of a Palestinian state. They won't pull out of the West Bank, which is the absolute precondition, because you understand the West Bank is a strategic highland overlooking the entirety of Israel. It would render Israel about 12 miles wide, I believe, 10 miles wide or so, at its narrowest point. And if there's any chance that Hamas and fellow jihadists are controlling that territory and have independence as a Palestinian state, Israel's in grave danger. So the condition for nudging Israel to take this risk basically goes through eliminating Hamas as a military and governing force. Now, David Lammy and Keir Starmer say that's what they want, but they're recognizing Palestine unconditionally, which is why plenty of people in the UK and elsewhere would prefer that the UK would hold out recognition of Palestine as a carrot in order to compel the Palestinians to sort of get their act together and get rid of Hamas somehow, to compel Hamas to disarm. So one thing I would hope, regardless of which countries recognize Palestine, which is largely meaningless, is that these European countries also do something useful. And that useful thing would be to put together a plan that would condition aid, reconstruction aid to Gaza on Hamas disarming, and would compel Israel to get out of the way and recognize that the Palestinian Authority needs to take over from Hamas, but also make everything conditional, everything on Hamas disarming, as the Arab League has called for, as the European Union has called for, as pretty much the entire world is calling for, by just recognizing Palestine and forgetting about the toxic Hamas roadblock. I very much fear that the UK and other countries are committing a tragicomic error.
Right. Thank you very much, Dan, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic now. Palestinians have inspected the damage caused by an overnight Israeli strike that hit a house in Gaza City today. According to reports, the strike killed 4 civilians from the Al-Haddad family. Let's listen in to a family member who spoke on this tragedy he faced overnight.
الساعة 1 أنا في الدور الخامس وهم في الدور الثالث سمعنا انفجار وخبر نزلنا هان لقينا الوضع هذا ولادي نايمين هان لقيناهم قاعد مستشهد الأم والطفل والطفلة وجنين كان في بطنها لقيناه معزول قاعد وزوجها حالته خطيرة خلناها المستشفى انبترت الرجل بتاع.
Meanwhile, on Saturday, Israel's military continued its assault on Gaza City and the wider Gaza Strip, targeting underground shafts and hidden structures. Gazan health authorities reported that at least 60 people were killed in these strikes. Amid these attacks, displaced Palestinians' families continued to flee southward from Gaza City, carrying their belongings along the coastal road. Let's listen into one such Palestinian moving south.
اطلعوا للشعب الفلسطيني، أقل ما فيها هدنة للشعب. هدنة عشان إيش؟ الناس تعيش بأمان. الأطفال راحت والشيوخ راحت والأولاد راحوا. وين الواحد بده يروح؟ لا حجر ولا دار.
The Israeli military estimates that it has demolished up to 20 tower blocks over the past 2 weeks and claims that more than 500,000 people have left the city since the start of September. However, the Hamas group disputes this, saying that just under 300,000 have left and around 900,000 people remain, including Israeli hostages. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dan Perry. He's a world affairs analyst, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dan, for staying with us. Now, looking at these news coming in, does Israel have any plans to ensure the safety of the Israeli hostages who are still in the captivity of Hamas?
I haven't seen a convincing plan. The government decided to, go into Gaza City with ground troops and initiate a gradual but ultimately full occupation of the Gaza Strip. And their critics warn, indeed, as your question suggests, that this will create great danger for the lives of the hostages, and of course, for Israeli soldiers and especially for Palestinian civilians. I haven't seen a compelling defense of the government's position. It's extremely unpopular in Israel, this decision to escalate the war. Everyone's against it. The military is against it. The military is executing this as slowly as possible in what they describe as a modular manner that basically is reversible as soon as negotiations restart and hopefully a deal is done. There is great criticism of the government along the lines of basically skepticism that they're doing this largely for political reasons because Netanyahu's coalition would fall apart unless he acceded to the wishes of the far right, which wants the war to continue. And the far right is not shy about saying what they really want, which is finding a way to remove the Palestinian population and settle Gaza with Jews. The finance minister, who is far-right firebrand, Smotrich, is openly speaking of Gaza as a real estate bonanza. It is a disgrace. It is a moral abomination. And on the strategic side, I very much understand Israel's desire to ultimately eradicate everything of Hamas. I think most rational observers of the situation in Israel-Palestine agree with that goal. The goal is right. The goal is righteous. But this current strategy it seems antithetical to that very goal, especially as Israel's quite open about the fact that they want civilians to go further south to Moussaoui and other areas in central Gaza reasonable in order that they be out of the way and not be hurt. But they're also saying that they're okay with Hamas operatives leaving alongside the civilians to reestablish themselves in the towns of central Gaza. So what have they accomplished? They've accomplished nothing. It boggles the mind that a country as clever as Israel, that's had the successes that Israel's had against Hezbollah, against Iran, and in general throughout its existence. Israel is a sophisticated and clever country, but this government is pursuing the Gaza war in a manner so ruinous, so illogical, and so inexplicable, frankly, that it risks becoming very unpopular in Israel itself. My only hope is that Netanyahu needs to face elections within about a year, and I don't think he can go to elections with the war continuing. So, at the very least, even though it's horrible to think of politics determining matters of life and death, I think he has to stop the war eventually. Hopefully, well before that, the world community, and in particular the U.S., will find a way to compel an end game. Donald Trump could end the war in a matter of days, if not hours, if not minutes, because Israel can't continue without the U.S., and Trump is allowing this to continue, which is why in my previous answer I said perhaps the Europeans can come up with basically a reconstitution of the Biden plan from late 2023, whereby Israel ends the war the Palestinian Authority returns to Gaza, Hamas is basically forced by the entirety of Arab and Palestinian public opinion to disarm, because all reconstruction depends on that. And Israel receives some carrots itself in the form of normalization with Saudi Arabia, and who knows, perhaps even, and I believe this is a future discussion for us, with Syria and even Lebanon.
Right. Thank you very much, Dan, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, world leaders are gathering in New York this week for the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaa has departed for the U.S. to address the assembly, marking a significant moment in Syria's history. The high-level debate opens on September 23rd with global leaders focused on peace, development, and human rights. U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to discuss global peace efforts, while Ukrainian President Zelensky will push for stronger sanctions on Russia. Other key leaders, including Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who plans to address Israel's actions in Gaza, and Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim, as regional tensions continue to rise. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Yvonne Gil will also speak on U.S. military operations in the Caribbean. The Syrian crisis and humanitarian issues are set to be the central topic of this discussion. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Dan Perry. He's a world affairs analyst, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dan, for staying with us. Now looking at the leaders coming in, especially now focusing on Ahmad al-Sharaa, the Syrian leader, and his past. What do you think what he brings to the table to United Nations General Assembly, and what do you think he will push for over there?
Well, Ahmed al-Sharaa brings a fascinating question that is both philosophical and geopolitical. Can there be redemption for a jihadist? The answer until recently would have been, well, there's pretty much no precedent for it. Al-Sharaa was a former a jihadist leader in Syria. He was not a good guy, and the regime that they established, his group, essentially in the northwest of Syria, around the Idlib area, was not the worst jihadist regime. It was by no means equivalent to Islamic State in Raqqa and Mosul, but it was pretty bad. And it was a light theocracy, and it was something of a mafia. And expectations were not that high that he would emerge as the leader that Syria needs, who is inclusive, who is respectful of the secular background of Syria, and of the need to be secular because Syria has too many different religious sects, and who would nudge Syria maybe even towards, dare we hope, some version of democracy, and who would be peaceable towards Syria's neighbors, and in particular Israel rather, who would be peaceable towards Israel, and who would break Syria's reliance on assistance from Iran and all the toxicity that comes with that. To everyone's amazement, to a large degree, not fully, but to a large degree, he seems to be doing that with some success. There have been hiccups, to be sure, like the massacre of Druze in southern Syria just about a month or two ago. And there, of course, have been killings of Alawites who were loyalists of the previous Assad regime. So it has not been smooth sailing. But al-Sharaa is in New York to cement the positive vision of him as a leader who is somewhat progressive in Syria, and who the world can work with, and basically who can compel outsiders to forget about his jihadist past, and who can get Syrians to forget about his jihadist past and trust him as a leader. It's nothing short of amazing should he succeed. And to a degree, he's already gone much of the way by getting Trump to lift sanctions on Syria merely by charming him in Riyadh 4 months ago. That's kind of ridiculous, but what really would be a genuine step forward would be for al-Sharaa to agree to a security pact with Israel, which would be potentially a big step towards normalization with Israel. Now, Trump is somewhat disappointed with his lack of success so far in ending the Gaza war, ending the Ukraine war. India, as you know, and Pakistan are not going along with his narrative that he made peace between them. The peace he supposedly made in Central Africa is very much unraveling. He could really use a win. And that win would be if al-Sharaa agreed to make peace with Israel.
Right. Thank you very much, Dan Perry, for joining us and staying with us throughout our news. Now we move on to Afghanistan. A Taliban government official has responded to the United States demanding over the Bagram airbase, stating that any deal involving Afghanistan's soil is not possible. The remark came after U.S. President Donald Trump warned Afghanistan, demanding the return of the airbase to Washington. He also threatened if Bagram is not handled back, bad consequences would or could follow. Located 40 kilometers from Kabul, the Bagram airbase hosted U.S. troops during the War on Terror. At its peak in 2012, it reportedly hosted around 100,000 troops from the United States and allied countries. After the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, the Taliban took control of the base. Now, President Donald Trump is pressing for its return to the United States. Now we have guest joining us for this discussion. Sadaf Yarmal, she's an Afghan journalist, joins us live from Quetta, Pakistan. Thank you very much, Sadaf, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, what are the geopolitical implications of President Trump demanding the return of Bagram Air Base, and especially given its strategic proximity to China?
Thanks for having me. And about your question, Trump's call to reclaim Bagram is a clear signal. Of Washington intent to reassert military influence in Afghanistan. The base holds a unique strategic value for Washington. It is near China's western frontier, close to Pakistan's nuclear belt, and within reach of Central Asia. Such a move would challenge China's growing presence in the region, alarm Russia and Iran, and potentially internationalize Afghanistan once again. It also undermines the Taliban's claim of sovereignty, making the issue not just bilateral, but a wider geopolitical flashpoint.
And Sadaf, what is the probability of this escalating into a military confrontation, given U.S.'s past in the region of over 2 decades?
The probability of a full-scale U.S. re-invasion is very low, as it would require massive resources and face regional resistance. However, the chance of limited military actions, such as airstrikes, drone operation, or special forces raids, it's considerably higher. The more likely scenario is raising diplomatic pressure, sanctions, and regional power competition. But any terrorist attack against U.S. interests or visible Chinese activity at Bagram could quickly escalate tensions. In short, large war is unlikely, limited conflict and heightened tensions are realistic.
Thank you very much, Sadaf, for joining us and sharing that insight all the way from Quetta. Now we move on to our next news. Hundreds of anti-government protesters clashed with police in the Peruvian capital, Lima, throwing stones and sticks as police officers fired tear gas on the demonstrators. The protests were organized by a youth collective called Generation Z as part of growing social unrest in Peru against organized crimes, corruption in public office, and a recent pension reform. According to reports, there were around 500 people gathered in the city center under heavy police presence. The clashes broke out as demonstrators tried to approach executive and congressional buildings in Lima. Now we move on. Russian President Vladimir Putin has hailed the revival of the Soviet-era Intervision Song Contest, calling it one of the year's most important cultural events. He told participants that the contest embodies respect for traditional values in different cultures and said it proves music can build trust and unity across nations. Let's listen into what President Putin has said.
Сегодня состоится одно из самых ожидаемых культурных событий года. Финал возрожденного международного музыкального конкурса «Интервидение». Представители более чем 20 государств выйдут на сцену с яркими и самобытными номерами для того, чтобы познакомить весь мир с современным музыкальным творчеством своих стран. Культура, музыка не имеют границ. Сегодняшний праздник призван показать объединяющую силу искусства. Уверен, что конкурс станет одним из самых узнаваемых и любимых во всем мире. Ведь через диалог и взаимоуважение, укрепление доверия между культурами мы становимся духовно богаче. Именно уважение к традиционным ценностям, к многообразию культур, по сути, является основной идеей конкурса и вдохновляет его участников на достижение творческих высот.
The Kremlin is promoting Intervision as an alternative to Eurovision, from which Russia has been banned since the war started with Ukraine. This year's competition features performers from more than 20 countries. The participants from all around the world were competing for a cash prize of 30 million rubles, and the top prize went to a Vietnamese singer, Duc Phuc, who won the final held outside of Moscow. Let's listen in to one of the contestants.
Ça nous montre que, parce qu'il y a des gens qui disent que les Russes ils ne sont pas très amicaux, ils ne sont pas ouverts avec les autres, mais la réalité est bien différente quand on est sur place. Ça montre que la Russie c'est vraiment un pays amical et c'est vraiment un pays ouvert d'esprit, donc c'est très satisfaisant.
An eyewitness who was at the Sky Meadow Country Club in Nashua, New Hampshire, United Kingdom during the shooting incident has said that she had to hide under a table during a wedding reception taking place at the venue when the shooter fired multiple gunshots. Let's listen in.
We had just gathered around the dance floor. We were about to do a Greek smashing of the plates and throwing the dollar bills. The bride had just come up to me and gave me the plates to say, all right, you give this to my husband. And all of a sudden we heard pop, 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 pop. Heard 5 shots. All of a sudden heard a gun, chaos, screaming, and then running. It was just the scariest thing I've ever experienced in my life. So I hid under a table. And so then your next thought is, okay, am I safe here? You know, am I a sitting duck? I mean, what's going to happen? Is this guy going to come through? Is he going to be looking under tablecloths? You know, is he going to be, you know, just shooting everyone in the room? I mean, you don't know. It's very scary to experience something like that.
According to the state attorney general, one man was shot dead and several others were severely injured when a man opened fire at a country club in New Hampshire. Police have confirmed that a suspect believed to be the shooter is now in custody. Authorities initially reported 2 shooters, but security video later showed only one person opened fire. The scene was declared a mass casualty incident by nearby Tyngsboro Police, and multiple law enforcement agencies from Massachusetts are now assisting the investigation. However, officials say there is no ongoing threat to the public. Well, this is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.